Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, the Comic Book Cast, and the Arun Mehta Show.
Aren't you glad you got your Nickelodeon? Aren't you glad
you got your Nickelodeon?
You watching Nick?
Aren't you glad you watching Nick?
Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia and I'm here with a very special guest. He's currently working on a Nickelodeon retrospective, but he also does retrospectives of other subjects such as Goosebumps. He's the founder of Pop Arena. We have Greg Stevens. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you for having me.
So, I'd love to know from you, what were your earliest memories of Nickelodeon?
Well, Nickelodeon's been around since I've had memories. I am early 30s, so I guess I'm considered a 90s kid at this point. So, yeah, just sitting around with a big bowl of Skittles, watching the Little Bits and Rugrats and Double Dare and all that good stuff.
Awesome. So you were just like watching whatever was like on TV at the time, like, you know, whatever that was like airing on Nickelodeon. Were you also like a PBS kid or a Cartoon Network kid or like ABC, NBC, CBS kind of kid as well?
Oh, yeah. Saturday morning cartoons on the networks. I was watching a lot of that. I was watching a lot of PBS, Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers. Cartoon Network, we got kind of late. I was approaching my teens at that point, so I watched less Cartoon Network and more Adult Swim. Most of that early Adult Swim, like Space Ghost. And getting a lot of cartoons from VHS, from the library. I was pretty much a media junkie as a kid.
Yeah, pretty much same here. I also was a bit of a media junkie as well. There's always been like that debate about like which network had like the definitive best programs to watch. You know, some people like to watch like the really crazy cartoons. Some people like to watch the more serious cartoons, like superhero cartoons, like Batman or X-Men or something like that. I would say that around when we were growing up as kids, there was a lot of variety as to what a program that you wanted to check out, and it would satisfy everybody.
Well, you definitely weren't spoiled for choice.
That is true, yeah.
I can't speak to the one thing that was banned in our household was superhero shows. So I actually missed the Batman train. I missed the X-Men train. Made up for those much later down the line, but that was the one genre that was like off limits in our house.
I understand. I remember when, listening to like various people in school as a kid, or even more recently listening to podcasts about, there was a lot of controversy about how, some parents would forbid their kids to watch certain programs. I knew a lot of kids who were not allowed to watch Ren and Stimpy.
Now, I was allowed that because Ren and Stimpy was like a fun cartoon show, fun animal shows, like Looney Tunes, as far as my parents could perceive. Something like in this specific case, the big superhero film that had just come out was Batman Returns, which is a very adult, sexually charged Batman movie. And my family took that to perceive that was also what the cartoons were.
That makes sense. I mean, even though that Bruce Timm and Paul Dini state that, some of the inspirations for the animated series was the Tim Burton movies, it wasn't like that obscene, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, no. They took there's some design choices, but they're very different animals.
Oh, absolutely. So, as a kid, what were your favorite Nickelodeon shows growing up?
While I was there for like the original Nicktoons, I was there for the big premiere of Doug and Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy. My jam was really the imported European Japanese shows like Belle and Sebastian, The Little Bits, Noozles, David the Gnome, Maya the Bee, Danger Mouse, those kind of shows. I enjoyed Doug and Rugrats and Rocko's Modern Life and all of that, but I leaned more towards the European and Japanese stuff they had airing at the time.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that I know a lot of people tend to cite either Dragon Ball Z or Sailor Moon as like their introduction to anime, but in a sense, those programs like The Adventures of the Little Prince or programs such as Mysterious Cities of Gold or Spartacus and the Sun Beneath the Sea, in which they had a mixture of Japanese and French animation studios creating it. For some people who grew up in the 80s, that was kind of like their introduction, if it's not Astro Boy or Speed Racer.
There's two levels to that, I think. I think there's your first anime, and then there's the first anime you know is an anime. Because, like, you know, when I'm 6 years old and I'm watching Grimm's Fairy Tale Adventures, I have no concept of the country it came from or the lineage of these animation studios. Something like Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon were actually like what I would consider the first animes I saw and knew them as animes.
That's true. But yeah, definitely the case in which, I think that if you were not a person who grew up in the 80s or like a Nickelodeon enthusiast, you most likely wouldn't know a lot about these programs that came from the European countries. I mean, sure, maybe with the exception of maybe Danger Mouse or Count Duckula, because those were like the well-known ones, but other shows have seemed to been a little bit more obscured over time. Even a lot of them still don't even have a DVD release.
Yeah, and we're talking late 80s, early 90s, so there's no internet really to look this stuff up.
Right, exactly. So the only way that you can be able to watch it is like old VHS recordings or word of mouth from your friends. So were there any live action shows that you grew up with?
I was pretty big into live action comedies. Clarissa Explains It All. God, Salute Your Shorts. Hey Dude. And definitely The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
Oh yeah, those shows were great as well. And it's also interesting because, those shows were kind of like, their ways of trying to create shows for older kids and teenagers that were a little bit different than what you would see in programs such as Saved by the Bell or Full House or any of the TGIF programs that used to air on ABC. It definitely was a lot more relatable, yet at the same time it was so strange and absurd that I think that's why people still remember them.
Oh, most definitely. When those shows came out initially, like 91, I think Hey Dude was 89, I was a hair under their age demographic. But they were they were the first couple of shows I wanted to aspire to grow up into. They were like, I'm not sure if I'm old enough for this, but I really want to be old enough for this.
Yeah, definitely, because a lot of these shows that Nickelodeon was portraying at the time, they were like older kids and teenagers. They weren't like the younger kids that much. I mean, you had, Hey Dude was a lot more like for teenagers. So was Salute Your Shorts. Clarissa Explains It All focused on teenagers. And Pete and Pete had a mixture of kids and teenagers. So it definitely wanted you to look up to them as like, I want to be like them someday.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I'm actually really curious about, what shows that you discovered over time in your retrospective that you wish that you would have saw the first time, or you were glad that you never saw as a kid because they were just so either mediocre or just like really out there that it didn't really make sense to you.
Well, I got into the Nick Knacks program, my History of Nickelodeon program, partially because I have such a strong nostalgic connection with Nickelodeon, but also because into my late teens and into adulthood, I've grown an interest in media preservation and media history. And so I was already getting into a lot of stuff that was way before my time. As for what shows I would love to see, of the original couple of years of Nickelodeon, I really want to watch a full episode of Hocus Pocus with Brad Williams, who was the puppeteer, did a lot of the puppeteering work on Pinwheel. And Hocus Pocus was kind of this switch around where the people behind the puppets on Pinwheel got to be in front of the camera, and the people in front of the camera got to do behind the scenes work. So it was this big kind of flip around.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll pop up eventually. I remember when I was starting my Nickelodeon retrospective like 6 years ago, and there was like literally no episodes of Pinwheel, like none. There was only like 2 or 3 minute clips, and then there was the theme song. And since then, there's been rediscoverings of VHS tapes that have like up to 6 hours in one shot. So I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere out there's somebody who does have like a bunch of VHS recordings of Hocus Pocus and various shows that you can't find anywhere else. I think even the person who wrote the Slimed and Oral History of Nickelodeon Golden Age book, Matthew Klickstein, when he was interviewing people for his book, he even knew a few people who actually still held copies of the old recordings of the Nickelodeon shows from the 80s and kept it because they wanted to have it personally archived, because they felt, in their opinion, the 90s was like downhill in terms of Nickelodeon, because they remembered the educational aspect of what Nickelodeon was. They felt it was gone when the 90s hit.
I got into tape trading, into trading television on VHS tapes back in like 97, I think. Initially for a show called Mystery Science Theater 3000, where a lot of the episodes could only be watched through recorded and distributed VHS tapes. And that kind of expanded into further VHS taping. And I actually, like, before YouTube was even a thing, I had seen an episode of Pinwheel on VHS tape. So they were definitely floating around there. And I think one of the great advantages of YouTube, which is in many respects a very garbage platform, but one thing it definitely allows is far easier preservation and distribution of all these old shows. And for that, I'm immensely grateful that we're even allowed to see what we have now, all the Pinwheel we have now, the clips we have now. Really, we're kind of in a golden age of this preservation.
Yeah, because even back then, media preservation was like very important, because there would be a lot of like old film reels that would be burned up over time in storage rooms, and they realized that, hey, a lot of these things can be lost over time, and so they make sure that they protected them in safes and vaults. I guess that's kind of like our generations of it, in which if we find something on VHS, we can easily digitalize it and put it up on YouTube for everybody to see.
Mm-hmm. Well, that tends to be true for about the first 30 or so years of any medium. Like, we're actually dealing with issues of video game preservation right now, because it's still very much a new medium, and nobody's really sure how to preserve old games, especially old online games. But yeah, typically the first 30 years that's when most of those silent films end up getting lost and destroyed. That's the first 30 years is when people don't think to preserve television shows on tape.
Yeah, like, the first season of Doctor Who is pretty much lost.
Oh yeah, the first like 4 or 6 seasons or so.
Yeah.
A lot of missing material there.
Yeah, and apparently, I think a few years ago, my friend was saying that, if anybody ever did have like a copy of the first 4 or 6 seasons of Doctor Who, then the BBC would actually give you like a TARDIS and a whole bunch of Doctor Who swag or something, which that just goes to show you how important it is.
I would like to say if I had a time machine, I would do a bunch of noble things, but I would probably just take a VCR to like 1965, just record a bunch of television.
Yeah, that'd be great. Just preserve as much as you can right before it just pretty much just goes obsolete. I mean, even for the longest time, the 66 Batman, the only way that people could see it was on reruns right before it was released on Blu-ray. That just goes to show you about how much preservation, recording stuff on VHS or whatever that you have, it can still be important. Even when back in college, if I wanted to see something like like a video online, and if I wanted to preserve it, I had to get like a CD, and I had to download the FLV file and drag it in, and you can only hold so much until eventually either that's gone or it's just pretty much like buried into the whole internet cyberspace thing.
I think I still have my 25 discs collection of burned Wonder Years episodes somewhere.
So, what has been your favorite subject to cover on the Nickelodeon retrospective so far?
Oh, I just really enjoy uncovering a bunch of stuff people have forgotten. My singular best episode, I think, was on Hocus Focus, because I got to focus on the career of Brad Williams. Really got to bring a spotlight to these artists who may not have been appreciated in their time in these more niche artistic realms. I just generally enjoy setting the record on a lot of this material, including fixing a lot of factual errors people have come to accept as actual Nickelodeon history. For example, very recently, it was considered common knowledge that ESPN aired for a few. I'm not ESPN. I had a brain fart there.
That's okay.
BET.
Yeah, BET.
There was a general conception that BET aired in the evenings on Nickelodeon, in that spot where like Nick at Night now exists. But after further research, this turned out to be completely false, and it's some fib somebody made in like 2010 that people came to accept so much as fact that you can find that information in textbooks now. There are textbooks that say that BET aired on Nickelodeon, which is just flat out not true. And I am glad that I can provide a service of correction on things like that.
Yeah, that's really good, because I mean, you know, just like the old saying goes, you know, don't always rely on stuff that you can find on the internet or even on various books that claim to be fact, because there's something out there that can claim that, hey, you know, that stuff is wrong. You know, because back then, you know, there used to be a case in which they would air programs such as the Donna Reed Show and Dennis the Menace and Mr. Ed. And then the buildings of Nick at Night came along when Fred Cyber put it all together. And yeah, something like the BET. I mean, I understand that MTV and VH1 alongside with Viacom was, you know, was a part of the whole Nickelodeon lineup, but the BET doesn't really make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't seem to fit in. It's like an interesting story, but it also goes along with, like, also in that spot they aired Star Channel, which became the movie channel, and the channel that would eventually become A&E. So it really didn't seem that far-fetched, especially since it'd mostly just be like, I believe it was Bible programming and movies at that time.
Yeah, it just goes to show you about how, you know, things that turn out to be that was actually fake just becomes factual over time. It's like why people have so many debates about various subjects over the years. It's like, is this thing correct or not? Is this thing good for you or not? So it's like we're in a never-ending battle of which is correct and which isn't.
Well, history is it's surprising when you realize how imprecise history can be. The further back you get, the less physical evidence there is for things, the less people cared about recording, archiving certain informations. And really, history is an act of storytelling, in that you're given these pieces and you have to form this narrative through that. And if you end up with the wrong piece in the wrong spot, you're not telling a true narrative. If it can be corrected, it should be corrected.
Yeah, that is true, because everybody should be able to know the truth. So I'm actually curious about, you know, all the stuff that you're going to be doing next for the retrospective. What other plans do you have as soon as you're done with it? Are you going to focus on another channel, or maybe focus on another, maybe a company or something? Or, you know, similar to like Goosebumps, maybe focus on another book series?
You know, that is so far down the line, I haven't thought about it, because the current plan is to go between the Pinwheel House and the Loud House in that 40-year time span, which is hundreds of shows, and I've only done about 20.
Right.
So we're still talking years commitment on Nick Knacks. I probably won't touch another channel. I would love to see if other people were inspired by Nick Knacks, if they wanted to do their own version for Cartoon Network or the Disney Channel or anything like that. I would love to see that. Love to see what they come up with.
Yeah, that'd be great. Are you gonna cover the movies as well?
The current plan is to cover the movies in batches of like maybe 5 or 6 movies at a time. So like there'll be an episode that focuses on, and I think the order is Harriet the Spy, Good Burger, the Rugrats movie, Snow Day?
Yeah, Snow Day.
Rugrats in Paris.
And
then Jimmy Neutron.
Yeah, Jimmy Neutron, and then it's either Hey Arnold the movie or Clock Stoppers. No, it's Hey Arnold then Clock Stoppers.
Right. So I would do like a batch of those all at once. And probably end up being like 4 or 5 episodes on the movies.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There'll also be standalone episodes for most of the spin-off channels. There'll be an episode about TV Land. I won't be covering all of TV Land shows. There'll be episodes on Noggin, on Teen Nick, on Game and Sports, and there'll be stuff on the 4 Nickelodeons, and there'll be an episode on Nickelodeon Studios, and an episode on Nickelodeon Magazine. So it's not just going to be TV.
Okay, that sounds pretty fair. Especially since there's like like you said, a 40-year history and just so many things to cover. Like, you could probably talk about like all the programs that they used to do, like, and all the events, like the Super Toy Run, and Nick Takes Over Your School, and also all the other after school programs like You Pick Live, Slime Time Live, Nick in the Afternoon, and maybe even some people would want to see Nick Jr. and stuff like that. So I can understand why it's going to take a long time to like cover everything. Trust me, I know what it's like to cover like something so much that it just overwhelms you. So yeah, I'm looking forward to what you have coming.
Looking forward too.
If you were ever to interview somebody or hang out with a person for a day that you watch from Nickelodeon, who would it be and why?
Only one person.
No, I mean anybody, like any person.
Oh,
anybody.
Well, I mean, I would be immensely happy to talk to anybody involved with a Nickelodeon show to just get more information. I'd love to have an afternoon with Geraldine Laybourne, or I'd love to have, I'd love to hang out at George James's house for an evening. Yeah, pretty much anybody. I could just like take the book Slimed. I got it right here, actually.
Oh,
I'm gonna open it to a random page. I'm not gonna look at it. I'm gonna point to a random name. Raymond Zibak.
Okay.
So
sure.
just anybody, really.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, why have one person when you could have all the people?
Exactly. Some people are obviously easier to get a hold of than others.
I know that some of them have, quit acting, or they are very private people. But yeah, you're right that there are some of them that are very easy to get a hold of.
Right now, for the era that I'm writing for the currently Nick Knacks is up to 1981. We're getting very close to doing the You Can't Do That on Television episode, which is going to be huge. Which means we're well into the Cy Schneider years, where Cy Schneider was running Nickelodeon. And I think Cy Schneider is still alive. And I would love to get his phone number and talk to him.
That'd be great.
He's probably 90 by this point, but yeah.
Yeah, again, these people, they're either living like really private lives, or, for even some of them, they don't even have social media. So you don't really know until you actually hear them on the news. It's like, something, there's something happened, or maybe they're, picking up a television or movie deal or something. So yeah, that's why sometimes it's kind of difficult to get a hold of people, especially if you want to interview them for a huge project like that.
just looking at your own videos, you clearly had a lot more success in that area than I have.
Oh, no, that's because I've been doing it for a long time. You just started. So I'm sure that as time goes on, then, you'll probably, have a ton of people on your show. So it's all a matter of, like, years of experience and perseverance and just, never giving up. And also, if a person is not interested in having you as a guest, then trust me, you don't want that. I remember, I'm not going to say the person's name, but I remember one time in which I wanted to get a person on as an interview for a blog, because we used to do blog interviews before we did podcasts. And this person was very, very snooty. And they were saying, do you know how long it took for me to type on this email, let alone me answering your questions? And so we were like, okay, that's fine. We don't have you. We don't. Thank you for your time. We will not be, pushing you to answer any of our questions. And then when we met up with another person who knew the person that we were going to interview, this person was like, oh yeah, that person's a grouch. I have no idea why this person would act like that, even though that he works on a program that's for kids, little kids, and he's like this grouchy person. It's like, yeah, it's crazy sometimes, just even though that, you think that a person who's working on a particular show that's for kids would turn out to be kind of like nasty at times. It's pretty interesting, but for the most part, a lot of the people have been really nice and supportive, and it's not just for me that they, also for the people who've been interviewed on Slimed, and there's the Orange Years, which is a documentary coming up. And there's the Ren and Stimpy documentary that's coming up. So, yeah, most of the people have been really sweet and supportive and are willing to share their stories.
That's awesome. The one interview I have managed to grab, which is not necessarily Nick Knacks related, except now it is. Before I did Nick Knacks, before I did pretty much anything else, I had a series of YouTube reviews for the Animorph series by Kay Applegate, and that included an episode-by-episode guide of the Animorphs television show that aired on Nickelodeon, which is kind of a precursor to what I'm doing now. Here's for that show, Ron Oliver.
Really? You got a hold of Ron Oliver?
Yeah, this was back in 2011. Very, very positive experience. Really happenstance. I just I basically asked on his IMDb message board, back when IMDb had message boards, and yeah, things just kind of fell into place. And it's the only show business interview I've managed to create, but it was a very positive experience.
That's great. It's kind of funny because the other day I saw somebody tweeting about how, the old saying goes that you should never meet your heroes. Well, that's completely wrong, because you want to be able to look at what they did and, try to see if you can be able to, to put your own spin on it and try to see how far that you can come with your own skills. And, not to mention that a lot of the people who are on the industry are very nice and are willing to take the time to, answer whatever question that you have, because they see, they went through the same thing, and they're willing to, help a person out who looked up to them, very similar to if they were to ask a question to a person that they looked up to. So it's like passing the torch.
It's not, yeah, you're right. It's not don't meet your heroes. In some cases, it's just be prepared to be disappointed by your heroes sometimes.
Yeah, and also, if you are to have a case in which you do, be sure to remember that they're human beings and they're just like any other person. I remember an interview that Mark Summers did in which he talked about how when he was 15 years old, he had the opportunity to meet up with Johnny Carson, and he interviewed him for something, and he was a huge fan of Johnny Carson, and he was like really nervous and stuttering and stuff like that, and he learned a very important lesson about, it's okay to be nervous the first time, but if you keep doing that, nobody's going to treat you seriously. You just have to remember that just be yourself. You don't have to worry about what they think of you. Just keep a calm and professional manner and know that they're just like you and me. They're normal people. Just because they're more well known on TV doesn't really amount to anything.
It's good advice.
Yeah, it's really good advice. And, I was able to take it to heart. And, same thing with you, in which when you interviewed Ron Oliver, I'm sure that you did the same thing, in which you kept a calm and professional manner, asking him questions, and you just treated him like a normal person.
Yeah, that was pretty important, especially because I was interviewing specifically about the Animorphs television show, which the Animorphs fandom generally do not like.
Oh, yeah. My friend Jashikins, who reviews Animorphs on her blog, she really doesn't like the TV series.
Mm-hmm. And it's fine to have that opinion, but I could imagine a lesser person trying to get a one-up on this guy who worked on the show, which, don't do that.
Yeah,
don't do that.
Really don't do that. Just because they worked on a show that didn't turn out as well as you wanted it to doesn't mean that they were heavily responsible for it. Just a few weeks ago, we had Mike Reese on the show, one of the former writers of The Simpsons, and he worked on a show called Homeboys from Outer Space alongside with a whole bunch of other writers. And he said that while that was one of the worst shows that he ever worked on, the experience that he had with working with those people was a great time. And a lot of the writers went off to do other shows like Family Guy. So just because that a person worked on a show that was deemed terrible or that you personally didn't like doesn't mean that that person is terrible. Which I'm sure that, a lot of people should take note of, especially with everything that's going on. I'm looking at you, Star Wars fans. But nonetheless, I think that, a person is, it's a job is a job, and it should be treated as such. And they should be respected, even though that something that they worked on you didn't like. You just have to understand that they're just doing it, and I'm sure that they had a good time doing it. So, I'm sure that, and whatever that they do next, I'm sure it'll be better. So just move on.
Yeah, and that is a personal philosophy with what I'm doing with Nick Knacks, in terms of, because I am very critical on a lot of these shows. I don't really approach any of them with kids' gloves. But it is important to make a distinction between being critical of the art versus being critical of the artist. It's really not necessary to be mean to the artist unless they are genuinely a monster. It's important to just make sure all frustrations you might have with the program is directed at the program, is directed at the art, and not necessarily the artist.
Yeah, although sometimes they don't take it to heart, especially those people who really think that what you're saying is wrong, and then they send you death threats.
Yeah, don't do death threats.
Yeah, trust me, I've gotten a lot of it over the years, and it's not fun. And I'm sure that you've gotten your fair share of complaints and criticisms, and you didn't like that either.
There's complaints and criticisms, and then there's the people who call you an SJW cuck and all that stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's at this point, that's kind of water off a duck's back. You can't take those people remotely seriously.
I guess we can move on to something else.
Okay.
Trust me, I tend to, I don't know, for some reason, whenever I'm doing, interviews, it tends to, talk about, negative things over time. And trust me, the Candy Milo podcast is like a roller coaster of emotions. Anyway, so moving on. So Goosebumps, I'm actually interested about your history of Goosebumps because my co-host and I, we have a long history of Goosebumps. When we were kids, we used to buy the books from the Scholastic Book Fair in our schools, and also we watched the TV series as well. So, what were your interests? What was your history behind Goosebumps?
I was too good for it as a kid. I didn't want to deal with it at all. Genuinely, I don't have a history with it. I was doing the Animorph videos. A lot of Animorph fans are, it's Scholastic, so there's a lot of crossover fans between Animorphs and Goosebumps. And people were asking me, could you do Goosebumps stuff too? And it's I didn't really read it as a kid. I don't really have the affection for it as I do for Animorphs. But eventually I threw him a bone and started doing these Halloween videos where I would let them vote on which Goosebumps book I review, and I review that. I realized those were some of my most popular videos on the channel. So in an act of corporate greed, I turned this yearly series into a monthly series, and that's how I got to be doing Goosebumps reviews.
Interesting story. I've actually never heard of a case in which, you know, something that you were just like doing it in the sake of, oh, I'll just do it because the fans asked me, and then it becomes like a huge phenomenon. Yeah, it's just crazy sometimes about, like, you know, you never know what could happen.
Yeah, and I'm upfront about from the video. These are Goosebumps reviews from the perspective of someone who was never a fan of Goosebumps growing up, who never read them as a kid. I read 2 Goosebumps books before 2010. I seen maybe 4 episodes of the TV show before then. It just was never my jam. But I figure at the very least I can offer a unique perspective.
Sure.
Of someone who is not a fan of the series talking about it. And I try to be fair with it.
I mean, that's all you can be, right?
It's still not my thing, but I try to be fair with it.
Hey, that's all you can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I only have a few more questions right before we wrap things up. So, with the surge of, 90s nostalgia and all the TV movies and continuations of various Nickelodeon properties, which one would you like to see come back, either as a TV movie or in a novel very similar to Things I Can't Explain? The continuation of Clarissa Explains It All. So currently, as of right now, we're getting the Rocko's Modern Life, Static Cling, there's the Invader Zim TV movie, and there's the Are You Afraid of the Dark TV movie. What would you like to see come back? Oh, and also there's the new episodes of Double Dare.
Right. That is a good question. With Nickelodeon's 40th, well, depending on how you count it, Nickelodeon's 40th anniversary coming up next year, I don't know if I want to see new content, but I would like to see some, maybe like a 40 days, 40 years of Nickelodeon where like each day focuses on a year. So like you get a day of like Pinwheel, and then a day of You Can't Do That on Television, and then a day of The Third Eye. As for bringing something back in new content, you could probably make a decent Secret World of Alex Mack where they're in their 30s and dealing with... But that's the problem with like bringing a lot of this stuff back, is that they're all grown up, and Nickelodeon doesn't make content about grown-ups. Their dramas, their comedies, their animation, that's all about children to young adults. So while I could write a really good The Return of Alex Mack script in my head, I don't think it would necessarily be in line with the Nickelodeon ethos. Maybe just bring back Guts.
Okay. I mean, they did try to bring back Guts 10 years ago, if you remember. My Family's Got Guts. But, hey, third time's the charm.
I mean, this Double Dare game show's okay. That Legend of the Hidden Temple movie sucked, but... Or Finders Keepers? Nobody talks about Finders Keepers anymore.
I guess so. I mean, I personally think that that the syndicated version was a little bit better. Maybe because I think that it was less complicated.
Well, that's the thing. Game shows are so much easier to just bring back because you don't have to change too much. There's always going to be kids to participate in with.
Yeah, until that's to Wild and Crazy Kids 2002 and My Family's Got Guts. In which they try to change the formula and it sucked.
I think the one Nickelodeon game show that wouldn't be timeless is Nick Arcade for obvious reasons.
Yeah, that's true. I know that, they've tried to do a Kickstarter for that twice. One with Nth the Level and the other one where it's like a Kickstarter towards like a reboot of Nick Arcade that I think that so far Phil is trying out in conventions. But yeah, that's really difficult to try to do that because Nick Arcade, you had the video games and it relied on a lot of points. Like, when was the last time that you played a video game where you had to have a high score in order for you to continue off to the next level?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, unless they try indie games, like, if you have, like, various points on Shovel Knight or maybe maybe you can do, Castle Crashers or something like that. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit difficult. But I still love to see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that Guts would work because we have American Ninja Warrior, and that's becoming really popular. So maybe have a kid version of that, or
there you go.
Yeah, and let's see, they already did Figure It Out. I do not want to see Euron. I definitely don't want to see Euron. Scaredy Camp never really got a chance. I would love to see them try to attempt that again. And let's see. I really liked Brain Surge. It's a shame that show never really caught on.
You know what I would do? Here's a deep pull. I would bring back Whack, the Nickelodeon wrestling show that aired for one episode.
Yeah, right. In this PC world, oh my god, that would. That would be canceled at the first commercial.
It's just professional wrestling with people in sports mascot costumes. I think it could work still.
I mean, we have Lucha Underground, so why not?
Yeah, just kiddie Lucha Underground.
There you go. Final question. I know we're going all over the place. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm apologizing to the audience, to anybody who's listening. Anyway, so final question. With Nickelodeon celebrating its 40th anniversary next year, what do you see the legacy of it as a whole?
Nickelodeon was a trailblazer. It was a trendsetter. It provided the model for children's television that has stuck around. Saturday morning cartoons, they're gone. In their stead are Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, Cartoon Network, and those latter two could not have been what they are or were without Nickelodeon. I think it's had its good moments, it's had its low moments, but it has always been the example the rest of television looks to. And I think that's why it's important to look at the history of Nickelodeon and why it's important to understand the history of Nickelodeon, because what Nickelodeon was doing at any given time, everyone else in the industry was looking at that. And they were deciding, we should do that, or we should do a better version of that, or, oh man, we shouldn't do that. I think it's probably in the top 3 most historically important cable channels, up there with like HBO and CNN.
All right. Well, that's very interesting to hear. I guess that we can conclude this episode of Casual Chats. So, Greg, once again, thank you so much for coming on by.
Thank you for having me.
So, please, I know that we've already promoted Nick Knacks a few times, but please plug the rest of your stuff.
Yeah, Nick Knacks you can find on my channel called Pop Arena. That is my personal brand where all my stuff can be found. There's Nick Knacks, the history of Nickelodeon. There's the Goosebumps Monthly, which is monthly reviews of Goosebumps, obviously. I also do reviews of Doctor Who novels, along with just a bunch of random things that people request. I have a request system open, so sometimes I'm talking about anime, sometimes I'm talking about other books, sometimes I'm talking about movies, so there's probably something there that will interest you. So that's Pop Arena.
All right. And by the time that this episode is coming out, I should be having another episode of Casual Chats uploaded. And I'm still working on a few video scripts. I can't really say too much about it, but I'm hoping that when the time is right, it'll be coming out. And thank you so much for listening, everybody. Let us know in the comments below about how did you first get introduced to Pop Arena's work, whether it be Nick Knacks or Goosebumps Monthly or any of the Doctor Who stuff or Animorphs. And also, if you have any interest in things for him to review, then I'm sure that maybe sometime he'll take a look into it. So that's it, everybody. Hope to see you around soon, and be sure to tune in 2059 when there's going to be a remake of Kids Court. See you then.
On the Lord Hut, here hut,
Nick,
on the Lord Hut, here hut,
Nick,
on the Ricky Ticky Low, while living #1 Nickelodeon.